In 2020, protests spread globally following the killing of George Floyd by a white police officer by kneeling on his neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. This incident highlighted the widespread prevalence of systemic racism and renewed the global fight against racial discrimination on the grounds of race. The historical injustices and untold sufferings caused by the legacy of slavery, transatlantic slave trade and colonialism, and the continuing prevalence of racial discrimination on grounds of race, ethnic or national origin, color, and descent needs to be acknowledged and addressed as a priority. What is descent-based discrimination? Descent-based discrimination segregates certain groups of people because of their inherited status at birth or descent or ancestry. The inherited status is fixed in the social system and it cannot be changed. Education or employment or economic status or marriage cannot alter the birth status. Descent-based discrimination is tied to the notion of purity and pollution. It brands descent-based groups as inherently polluted, filthy, impure, and lesser human beings. Globally, descent-based communities are treated less favorably or unequally, stigmatized, oppressed, and ostracized. Fact 1. Discrimination based on descent is prohibited under international human rights law. Since the Durban Conference in 2001, the rights of descent-based groups have been on the international agenda. In 2002, the United Nations Committee on Racial Discrimination, in its General Recommendation 29, affirmed that descent-based discrimination includes caste and analogous systems of inherited status. Caste status is inherited at birth and follows the individual until death. Caste-based discrimination exists in all walks of life and adversely affects people's life chances. One's caste status can determine one's occupation, hence the coinage of the term, discrimination based on work and descent. According to the caste system, people born into so-called low castes are considered as polluting, filthy, and they are referred as untouchables. They are subjected to occupational segregation, prohibition of marriage outside the group, and untouchability practices. For example, people from low castes are socially segregated to separate physical spaces from housing to burial grounds. People from low castes are assigned to jobs which are considered degrading and they cannot break free. People from low castes cannot marry or share goods or services or eat together with people from other castes at the same table. Women from low castes bear the brunt of discrimination, including sexual harassment and violence. Stigma of racial discrimination based on work and descent is a global phenomenon. Despite constitutional guarantees, institutional racism and casteism undermine the autonomy and agency of racialized and descent-based communities. In both cases, those affected face social exclusion, institutionalized oppression, administrative apathy, and violence. Fact 2. Caste-based discrimination is a global phenomenon. It is estimated that over 250 million people suffer from caste-based discrimination worldwide. Although the highest number of caste-based communities are concentrated in South Asia, caste-based discrimination is widespread in Africa, the Middle East, the Pacific region, as well as in diaspora communities. Outside the South Asian context, research on caste-based discrimination is underdeveloped. There is a lack of official, up-to-date, and disaggregated data. In Africa, the 3 primary types of descent-based discrimination includes discrimination based on real or perceived forms of slavery, caste-based discrimination, and discrimination against hunter-gatherer societies. The descent-based discrimination is widespread in countries such as Burkina Faso, Burundi, Cameroon, Côte d'Ivoire, the Gambia, Guinea, Guinea-Bissau, Liberia, Madagascar, Mali, Mauritania, Niger, Nigeria, Senegal, Sierra Leone, and Somalia. Fact 3. Caste-based discrimination is either based on religious or other backgrounds. It is a common misconception that caste system is exclusively a Hindu phenomenon. Caste-based discrimination in South Asia is linked to Hinduism. The Hindu mythology divides the Hindu society into 4 groups, including Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Shudra. The so-called outcasts or untouchables are placed outside the pyramid of these 4 hierarchical groups. Caste in South Asia transcends all religious affiliation. The caste system has permeated into all religions in South Asia, including amongst Sikhs, Muslims, and Christians. Fact 4. Historic marginalization and systemic discrimination hinder descent-based groups from attainment of equality in education. Because of their social status, descent-based groups often lack opportunities and resources and face barriers in accessing education. Descent-based groups are known by different names in their own cultural and country contexts. In South Asia, for example, they assert and call themselves Dalits. In other countries, they have different names. In India, Dalit children are forced to perform manual work in schools, such as cleaning toilets and picking garbage. In Japan, the dropout rate of the Buraku children, who belong to the marginalized descent-based community, is 2 to 3 times the national average. In Yemen, 80% of the Muhammadan children were reported to be illiterate and suffer extreme poverty. In Mauritania, over 80% of the Haratin children did not complete primary school. In Madagascar, illiteracy rates of Andevo children are related to systemic discrimination. In Senegal, children from so-called lower castes are prevented from sitting with classmates from dominant castes. Women and girls from descent-based groups have lower literacy levels and are more likely to be prevented from pursuing education. Fact 5. Historic marginalization and systemic discrimination of descent-based groups determines occupational segregation and hinders them from gaining equal opportunities in employment. Around the globe, in employment, descent-based groups are compulsorily mandated to undertake certain types of occupations. Their identity determines their occupation. These are typically jobs that are regarded as polluting. For example, Dalits in South Asia are forced to do street cleaning, handling human waste, and animal carcasses. In India, the Dalit women in particular are forced into manual scavenging, that is, cleaning of excreta from dry latrines. In Yemen, the occupation of Muhammadan is often limited to jobs like garbage collection, street sweeping, and cleaning toilets and drains. In Somalia, Bantu and other groups are stigmatized and restricted to occupations regarded as polluting. Labor mobility is strictly prohibited, and any attempts to challenge or refusal to undertake the jobs regarded as polluting occupation results in community boycotts, physical and psychological aggression and punishment. Fact 6. Institutional racism and casteism results in disproportionate rates of incarceration of descent-based groups. The demographic composition of society is rarely reflected in prisons. The disproportionate representation of descent-based groups in prisons in many countries highlights the historical marginalization and structural discrimination of these communities. For example, in India, the Dalits, Adivasis, and Muslims comprise 39% of the prison population and constitute over 55% of the pretrial prisoners. Too often, law enforcement machinery is entrenched with racist or casteist bias. Descent-based groups are often subject to brutal and excessive use of force, discriminatory stereotypes, and lack of effective legal support. Fact 7. Descent-based groups are targets of hate speech and abuse, both online and offline. The pandemic has given rise to a new wave of hate speech, abuse, and human rights violations targeting minorities. Hate speech in social media is spreading at an alarming rate. Ethnic minorities such as persons of African descent, Asian communities, Dalits, Rohingya and Roma, and religious or belief minorities in countries in Africa, Asia, the Americas and Europe are frequently the targets. Fact 8. women and girls of descent-based groups suffer both gender and caste-based discrimination. Intersection of gender, class and caste makes the women and girls of descent-based groups targets of violence, including rape and murder. Women and girls of descent-based groups face high rates of sexual violence within society. Gender-based violence against these women and girls is used as a means to crush dissent or send a message to the whole community and teach the community a lesson not to stand up for their rights.